Hi, everyone. This is Connor Wolansky, and I did my teacher interview with one of the professors from my own undergrad, Professor Jim Davis from Troy University. He works in the English department there, and I had the good fortune of having a couple classes with him in my days as an undergrad student at Troy. So, my first question was about Professor Davis's educational background. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts in English with a minor in German, but he said that he also had enough hours for minors in both creative writing and Russian area studies. And then he earned his Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing at the University of Alabama. I asked Professor Davis if there were any specific teaching experiences that stood out to him in his memory, and if so, kind of the reasoning behind that. And he said that after 39 years, there were many, but for the most part, they involved students who couldn't grasp or were having trouble getting some idea at first, but then he was able to watch them work hard and finally have that kind of eureka moment, and that he found that particularly rewarding. I asked Professor Davis what the reasoning was for why he wanted to become a teacher, and he said, to be honest, he mainly wanted a terminal degree in creative writing, but he quickly realized that teaching was about the only job that he would be able to secure with that degree. So he said that even earlier, of course, he'd learned that literature was the love of his life, and so what better way is there to spend your life than trying to teach others to love literature and writing as much as you do? When I asked him about his philosophy of teaching, he said that he fervently believes that learning best happens in an open, good natured atmosphere where really everyone is encouraged to participate. And he went on to, I guess, give his own definition of learning as example and discussion rather than lecture. And that when you're teaching a concept, you have more examples to back it up and kind of reinforce your main points. So I asked the professor what he found to be efficient teaching methods, and he really just zeroed in on one, which was repetition, repetition, repetition. For a composition course, examples on the board, followed by quick quizzes where each student gets called on to answer aloud and explain, followed by actual drafts, as they move into putting the concepts into practice. For a lecture class, maybe point out as many examples as possible of each important idea, along with some visual reinforcement on the walls, and that could be in various different mediums. I asked Professor Davis what some of the barriers were that he faced, particularly at the beginning of his teaching career. And really, he said just getting comfortable in front of the class. He started teaching as a 23-year-old grad student, teaching 18-year-olds. So sometimes they had their own agendas, and that agenda wasn't always being the most attentive and there to learn student. So he said in his atmosphere that he established was kind of an open and loose class, and so it could make it hard to crack down on the more stubborn students, but luckily he was able to win them all over fairly quickly. I asked him about his solutions for dealing with students of differing English language competencies in his classes, and really he just boiled it down to a matter of respect, that he didn't want to portray any particular attitude either on his face or in his voice, and that he would repeat constantly that if anyone has a question, to ask it, because at least half of your classmates are wondering the same thing but don't have the courage to ask. He would repeat key ideas and examples as often as necessary for the least competent student in class to get it. And he wouldn't worry about, being repetitive with the better students, because he said that hearing it an extra few times isn't going to hurt them. I followed that up with a sort of related question. What are some solutions for students who seem to have difficulties in language arts in general? And he answered at first with a joke that if he had the answer to that, he'd be rich. But he went on to say that he teaches remedial courses about once a year, and there's always some students who, for example, cannot learn the difference between a complete sentence and a subordinate clause. So, in general, all he can do is just try his best and hope that they finally get it by the end of the term, and that's through just determination and repetition, really. I asked Professor Davis if he has any shared teaching experiences with other language arts teachers, and if so, how that experience differed from teaching solo. And he really didn't accept for saying that when remedial teachers all get together at the end of the term to grade exit essays. But he did say that he finds that some teachers don't necessarily emphasize the same things that he does. And since he's been doing this for 39 years, he usually chalks it up to youth and inexperience, but that he tries to stay open-minded because every now and then he will learn some new things. I followed up with whether he had any strategies for improving one's teaching, and he really just kept it simple. He said to always be on the lookout for new ideas from other teachers and to just stay in the know on the latest developments in the field and to respect the work enough to always have an attitude of trying to improve yourself. I concluded the interview by asking Professor Davis if he had just any final thoughts or general recommendations for future teachers, and he just reiterated to be positive and try to like and respect every student you come into contact with. And then he left me with a memorable quote by saying, if you don't love the students, then why the heck are you in teaching? Because it sure isn't for the money.